Now, if you found yourself missing appointments or forgetting where you put your keys lately, it might not be entirely your fault. While COVID lockdowns are a thing of the past, the psychological impacts of isolation are still being felt, with many people experiencing memory problems. According to something called the social brain hypothesis, it's because the human brain specifically evolved to support social interactions, and without them, the brain can change its structure and suffer cognitive impairment. To tell us more, we're joined by neuroscientist from the University of Tasmania, Leela Landowski. Leela, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
This sounds a bit scary. What's going on inside our brains?
Look, we've noticed that throughout this lockdown period, and in fact, even coming out of lockdown, that we've seen an increase in depression and anxiety. And really, there are two major driving forces for that. We've got this loss of social engagement that we would have experienced normally, and we've also got an increase in stress. So we're really driven by these two different processes. So if we think about the social isolation component of that, so we're fundamentally social creatures, right? We are designed to be communicating, to be, working in groups, working in teams, being collegial. And, there was this systematic review and meta-analysis which basically show that if you have been socially isolated for a long time, you have a 20% increased risk of death. Another study showed that you have a 20% increased risk of dementia. So clearly there's massive changes that are happening in the brain in response to this social isolation. And if we look at it from, I guess, more of an individualistic perspective, we know that people who have been socially isolated, they actually have an increase in this peptide in the brain called tachykinin. And tachykinin is associated with increased anxiety and increased aggression. So when people were returning to work and to school after being in lockdown and after being socially isolated for a while, it makes sense that you had this paradoxical, this anxiety about returning to the place that you really were craving. Like, we really wanted to be back at school. We really wanted to be around the people that we adore and the people whose company we enjoy. But a lot of us really did feel that anxiety related to that process.
Does it mean that we underestimated the effect of lockdown, that it was actually worse for us when we went through rolling stages of lockdown right around the country, that maybe we would have been better off for something a lighter version of that?
Oh, look, it's really hard to say, but I mean, the science certainly says that this constant stress of lockdown will change our brains. And certainly if we look at the way stress changes our brains, it really does that on a fundamental level. Stress changes every cell in our body, right down to the level of our DNA. So we know that stress is this it's not just a feeling of anxiety, it's not just this strange feeling inside, it's a physiological response, and that physiological response releases hormones like cortisol, like adrenaline into our bodies to actually make us feel, it increases our heart rate, it'll increase blood flow to our muscles so we feel more ready to deal with a challenge. For example, running away from a lion. But the thing is, the exact same thing happens in response to modern day life stresses that are not life-threatening, like being stuck in lockdown for COVID, like worrying that you're going to bring COVID home to your family. So knowing this and knowing that this is actually changing our brain has quite, worrying consequences. If we consider the changes that are happening to the brain, just because they're happening as a result of that lockdown and as a result of that isolation and as a result of not socialising, it means the reverse is true as well. So it means that socialising with people that you enjoy and spending that time together means that you will be more protected from those changes.
Leela, just very quickly, some tips on getting match fit and going out and seeing people in real life again, because I have to admit, I've struggled. Once I'm out, I'm kind of thinking, I just want to be in bed or in front of the TV.
Well, I guess some tricks to help us reduce the effects of stress in our lives. Exercise. I know we've all heard it before, but exercise has very profound effects on our brain. It increases the levels of things like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like a fertilizer for the brain. So it makes more brain cells. It makes those brain cells work more effectively. Things like actually being in a sauna, or if you don't have a sauna, go into a really hot bath, kind of as hot as you can tolerate, not so hot that you get a burn like me, but that will also reduce the levels of cortisol in your brain. We've also got things like actually socialising with people, so reaching out, making a phone call and talking to people.